This is Fred Judd here. In the background there you can hear some of my electronic ramblings. I thought we'd put on a little radiophonics, shall we call it.
Frederick Charles Judd, the unsung inventor and proselytiser of early British electronic music, is still highly regarded for his design innovations and prolific writing on all aspects of amateur radio. His commitment to music and work with tape, newly developed circuitry and experimental sound provides the focus of this film, a story that has remained untold since his death in 1992. Although a professional engineer, F.C. Judd was rooted in the DIY tradition, promoting the make-do-amend approach of World War II-driven austerity and ingenuity. Whilst his lifelong passion was radio, he was also the prime mover of electronic music for the amateur, helping to foster an appreciation of the possibilities of new sounds from the tape recorder at a time when the establishment was still largely suspicious and the public had no awareness of its potential. Like many British backroom boffins, self-motivated, modest, inventive and prolific, Fred's work hardly registers in the history books, yet his contribution and impact on electronics for the hobbyist is considerable. Looking at his most significant period from the late 1950s to the early 70s, when his work in creating, designing and writing about electronic sound was at its peak, this film places him in context amidst the music and tape recording technology of his day, in which he played a leading role in its understanding and promotion. Fred Judd was born in 1914 in Woodford, East London, and like so many youngsters of his generation, developed an early and abiding passion for radio. He constructed a wireless crystal set while still at school and found a natural affinity with electronics, an interest that remained throughout his life. By the age of 15, he was able to construct valve receivers for shortwave, and this led to his amateur radio transmitting license being granted in 1934. After working in bicycle and wireless repair shops and taking City and Guilds exams in radio communication, Fred began his professional career in the development of measuring equipment and domestic radio services, and was employed by some of the leading manufacturers of the day, including Kossa and Wareite. During the 1930s, he began writing technical articles for magazines, a pursuit which was to endure into his retirement. With the outbreak of World War II, he served in the RAF Coastal Command, working with highly secret radar equipment, just as the electronic music pioneer Tristram Carey was engaged in similar work in the Royal Navy. Both men saw the potential for harnessing electronic technology to make sounds and music. Upon being demobbed from the RAF, Fred continued work with electronics and radar, joining the staff of Kelvin and Hughes as a research and development engineer in marine radar apparatus. He remained with the company for almost 10 years, and at the same time he was occupied with the design of magnetic tape recording equipment and radio remote control. The first of his 11 published books came out in 1954, containing circuit designs for radio-controlled models. Later in the decade, with his knowledge and expertise established, he was awarded associate membership of the Institute of Electrical Engineers. During the 1950s, despite institutional indifference, interest in electronic music was gathering pace amongst a number of individuals around Britain, and with Tristram Carey in the vanguard, several private studios were established by the middle of the decade. In 1958, the BBC was pressured into setting up the Radiophonic Workshop, with Daphne Oram and Desmond Briscoe, two of the staff pushing forward the development. Fred was keenly aware of this progress and had already assembled his home studio and penned an article, Effects with a Tape Recorder, for the Radio Constructor magazine in 1956.
It is extremely interesting, and it is quite an industry. Daphne Oram, of course, is very well known in the field of that. In fact, there was an article, a feature on television about her, wasn't it? You know Daphne Oram very well, don't you? Yes.
Daphne Oram, the first head of the Radiophonic Workshop, left the BBC in 1959 to set up her own studio in Kent, and devoted much time and effort to producing electronic music and developing her synthetic sound generating system, Auramix. Fred and Daphne were in close contact through their shared efforts in disseminating experimental tape music to the general public. They both lectured widely up and down the British Isles, reaching out to amateur tape recording clubs that had sprung up during the 1950s and 60s. The Brussels World's Fair in 1958 was a popular large-scale exposition where experimental tape music was heard by a wide cross-section of people. Fred wrote about the Philips Pavilion and Poème électronique in his first electronic music book, and Daphne Oram visited Expo 58 and was enthused by the avant-garde sounds that were gaining acceptance on the continent. In 1959, amateur tape recording was launched. By 1960, Fred had taken the post of technical editor, and the magazine was featuring articles on electronic sound and tape manipulation. Fred became chief editor in 1963 and remained at ATR's helm until it folded in October '67. He continued writing about music and tape recording for a variety of different hobbyist publications, including Practical Electronics, Practical Wireless, Popular Hi-Fi, Everyday Electronics and Studio Sound. Such was the breadth and frequency of his writing, he sometimes resorted to pseudonyms so his name did not appear too often in the same issue. His expert analysis and reviews of all the latest electronic equipment were regular features, and he was well known and respected for his in-depth technical knowledge.
Whoa, I'm up. I left the replay head connected. Somebody might hear it. The book, that's now scheduled for publication in February. I've got the final book jacket. There's also negotiation going on for it to be published in Germany and also in France. The subject I'm dealing with is multi-track music recording, and of course that's covered quite to some extent in the book.
His book Electronic Music and Musique Concrète was published in 1961 and is one of the earliest in the world to tackle the subject and provide practical information and circuit diagrams for creating experimental music on tape. At this early stage, there was still an ideological gulf and perceived difference between the French microphone-orientated Musique Concrète and the oscillator-driven electronic music proposed by the Germans, but but this demarcation proved academic as the two approaches were readily intertwined. Fred consolidated his position with tape recording for everyone in 1962, setting the pace for writers of instructional books that followed. As a result of his know-how and experience of electronics, he became a regular contributor to the BBC radio programme Sound until it was prematurely axed in the mid-60s.
Musique concrète is fascinating, and there is plenty of scope for experiment. To give you some idea of what can be accomplished, listen once again to the sound we began with, that of the china bowl. And now a part of a composition which I've created entirely from that one sound.
Thank you, Mr. Judd. You've made it sound very simple and straightforward. But I think there may still be some who feel that this would be too complicated or too demanding for them, and who may want to be amused with less effort.
Fred was instrumental in the founding of the Centre of Sound, which opened in Archer Street in Soho, London in 1961. A newly converted building housing cinema, theatre, hi-fi lounge, restaurant, bar and state-of-the-art recording studio. He was technical director and installed a sound visualisation unit which encouraged visitors to the centre to speak and see their voice patterns represented on a TV screen. In July 1961, he gave a lecture on electronic music, which was followed by a concert of his own tape compositions, together with those of Daphne Oram and distinguished Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu. Sadly, the Centre of Sound was not to last, and before too long this exciting venture had closed down.